Hi guys, our final lecturette for Module 3, 3.5, the Fallacy, Supremacy. So, as you saw, in 3.3 we were talking about research that we did to study white supremacists and the narrative that supported white supremacy as communicated on that website. So I want to talk about the fallacy of supremacy in this context, and this comes after a lot of years of thinking about this, a lot of research, but most of all, a lot of reading, and a lot of reading of both books and research. So I want to start with what is race, and it's kind of an interesting question when you think about it. Most folks base this on easily observable and physical characteristics. So race is something we use to respond to a stimuli or to classify, categorize the stimuli. And remember that I said if we use race as an explanation for observed phenomenon, we're engaging in racism at that point in time. So eugenics and racial hygiene programs existed in the early to mid-20s all over the world, right? United States, Europe, as an attempt to improve the species. And the idea was that we breed cattle, we breed dogs for improvement. Why aren't we breeding people to improve the species as well? And we find out that it becomes a lot more complicated in people based on the domains in which we might demonstrate improvement. It's pretty easy to breed a faster horse and your goal is that the horse is faster. But if you're trying to breed a superior human, what in fact does that constitute, and what is the genetics that supports your contention? And that's where the whole idea of eugenics starts to break down. So what constitutes improvement? In what domain, right? What domains are important for improvement? Is it intelligence? Is it physical robustness? Is it resistance to disease? Is it skin color? Is it what constitutes an improvement? And notice this is up for grabs and up for debate. And then we run into a bigger issue. Who the hell decides what is superior and what isn't? Right? And many people who decide that they are entitled to say what's superior, say they have they invoke I have a God-given right, or I'm entitled. But then other people might not agree. And there's 7 billion of us on this planet, so there's a lot of room for a lot of disagreement. Now, let's talk about race then, but I want to point to myself here. I'm going to pick on myself for a little bit. We might ask, well, who am I? And many of us, I don't know if you've done it, I jumped into 23andMe and Ancestry.com. I sent in my DNA, and there's downsides to that too, right? So I understand that. Through the process, I find that I have a half-sister. I've always known I was adopted, and my half-sister, she was in 23andMe, I was in 23andMe. What do we see? We got like a 20-some% match. It means we're half-sisters. We shared the same father, as we found out. We've gotten together, we've met each other, and it's fascinating how similar we are, but there's the differences as well, right? So who am I, though? And according to 23andMe, I'm pretty white. And, I knew I was adopted from the time I was old enough, and my dad's side of the family was Italian-American, Polifroni. I got frickin' olive skin, so I always kind of considered that I was probably at least half Italian. I knew my birth mother was half Swiss and half Portuguese, so I had some kind of concept. But once you do the DNA thing, wow, interesting stuff comes to light, all right? So I'm about 84.6% Northwestern European, so that makes me about 40% French and German, and the Swiss part shows up here just like I was told through the finding of my birth mother. So a lot of German and kind of a lot of southern Germany, right, and Bavaria and Switzerland, right, and then British and Irish. So I'm about 20% British and Irish. Greater London, and look how refined they can be in this approach. County Cork, Ireland is plus 14 regions. So obviously I'm a mutt, if you want to use that term. But then there's a little bit of Scandinavian, a whole 1.3%. Broadly Northwestern European, right, and what do we see there? Then that's kind of the culmination of all that. But Southern European, especially Spanish and Portuguese, about 11%, right? Or Southern European, about 1.5%. So that's where I figure the olive skin comes from, my looking less than whiteness, and then broadly European. This is who I am, right? But notice, this has nothing to do with race, and this is why I work really hard in my class now to use the term race less and less and ethnicity more and more. because an advertising slogan. But that's not all, folks. What do we know? I have frickin' Neanderthal ancestry. I have 288 genetic variants that can be traced to the Neanderthals, ancient humans who interbred with modern humans before going extinct 40,000 years ago. So now, really, this kind of new information is kind of mind-boggling, because ultimately, well, I'm a member of the human race, hominids, etc., but then we can subdivide that into Cro-Magnon versus Neanderthal, and we see that Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon obviously interbred at some point in our history, because some of us carry Neanderthal genome, right? So, and then at 23 minutes says, hey Mark, you got more Neanderthal DNA than 67% of other customers, so it means that I'm about two-thirds, there's only about a third of the people who engage in 23andMe who might have more Neanderthal. And what does that mean? Well, interestingly, when you think about it, and you have Cro-Magnon, right? There's Neanderthal, Homo heidelbergensis, even before that. So there's different types of humans. So when we go back and we think about this, does skin color actually make much of a difference? Is it meaningful, right? So African Americans strangely carry little, if any, Neanderthal variants. Now, think about this. Cro-Magnon, supposedly more advanced, more evolved than Neanderthal. And we see Europeans, as like me, carrying Neanderthal genome. But we see African Americans carrying no Neanderthal, virtually no Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon. So really, African Americans might derive from a further down the road, that is a higher level of evolutionary time, which flies in the face of what many white supremacists might say or think, right? They're almost exclusively Homo sapiens sapiens, representing the more modern evolutionary history for African Americans. So what I'm trying to do is call this whole question of race into doubt, right? And the scientific rejection of race, I'm not the one who led this effort. I'm just someone tagging along on the idea. The mainstream belief among scientists is that race is a social construct. It has no biological meaning whatsoever, right? And yet you might still open a study of genetics in a major scientific journal and find categories like white and black being used as biological variables, and it makes no sense to do so, because it's just a continuum of shades of skin, which is related to the melanin, right, and nothing else. It's simply too crude, right, a concept to provide useful information, according to Udell. And I think, as you can see, Cerebellum agrees as well. Skinny, I don't think, is paying attention. He just wants to get pet. So, what do we know? Ethnicity to replace race. Like I said, I'm trying to do it. Ethnicity is the fact or state of belonging to a social group that has common national or cultural tradition. So notice it's socially derived rather than biologically derived. Race appears to be based almost entirely on the perception of physical color similarity. And you can see that the utility in that is almost non-existent, right? So, ethnicity might be predictive of behaviors that are linked to cultural traditions, so it might have some useful component to it. But race appears to be predictive of absolutely nothing. So I think it's high time for us to kind of drop the term race, stop thinking in terms of race as explanatory, and start using the science we have available to us to delve into the effects of death, ethnicity. And now I want to kind of really point out the fallacy, at least to my mind. I teach a class called Personnel Psychology. It's scientific personnel selection, and the idea is we test people to find who is the best fit to a given job. Now, a test that is not used in this context to any great extent would be the IQ test, but all tests, many tests, if they're standardized and normed, will yield a bell curve of the results of the people who've taken that test. But I want to show you something here, and I'm going to pick on intelligence, but you can think of it in terms of any number of individual trait characteristics. So we know that, in fact, the mean for the IQ test is 100. It's standardized and normed to that. So if I give a sample of people an IQ test, what we're going to see is the average IQ in a large enough sample will be 100. That's just the way the test is designed. Now, someone back in the day, when they wanted to make a case, and there's that nasty-ass book called The Bell Curve, tried to say, well, look, if we split it out and we take the bell curve, but we split it into two groups based on race, for example, race A and race B, we see that race A has an average IQ of 100, but we see that race B on the same test only has an IQ, let's say, of 96. And thus, from this, I'm now going to say that race A is superior intelligence to race B. Now, we already know that the IQ test has a lot of issues with culture, etc. So let's just set that aside. I want to go back to the personnel psychology kind of problem here and perspective. I want to hire an intelligent person, that is, I want to hire people with high intelligence scores. Suppose then, what we're saying is, note that, hey, race A, man, hire race A because they're more intelligent. Don't hire race B because they're less intelligent. But let's face it, there's a whole bunch of people of race B who are more intelligent than these people of race A. So it's not the race that makes the difference. We should be focusing on the individual score when we're looking to hire people necessarily. So the idea that one race is superior to another is really hiding the fact that we're individuals and we're already distributed in this quality. So it really is individual performance, not group membership, that really should indicate hiring decisions. Now, intelligence is rarely used in this context. There's many other things, cooperation, skill level at a certain task. But regardless, the fallacy of race is that people say, well, my race is superior. I'm going to say, first of all, on what criteria, and that is every member of your race superior to every member of the other race? And the answer to that question is always going to be no, so race really loses its utility as an indicator or predictor of performance. So let's measure it at the individual level. That's predictive. I hire the candidate who scores the highest, right? Okay. So if our goal is to predict behavior, performance, measurement at the individual level is going to yield far better results. Racist, racial explanations just don't stand up to the science. Don't stand up to the statistics, right? But one thing that skin color does do is it causes visceral response when people notice someone of a different race, of a different color. And that visceral response is uncomfortable, and that visceral response must be explained. So we often use it in terms of race and craft narratives that justify the difference between the races that explains my visceral response. We don't need the explanations. We need to work on the viscera, right? So if the concept appeals to you, consider taking personnel psychology in the springtime when we look at in fact, predicting individual performance. Remember, cats don't like water. We know that to be true about cats. Except this individual seems to. So thank you very much. I'll see you for Module 4 coming up pretty quick. Let's say goodbye. And let's say goodbye to Aspen and Montana. Montana's still with us. Aspen found a really nice home as a kitten. You guys, have a good day.